In the remote valleys of Montana, a struggling rancher fights to save everything his family built. Bo Larkin works 16-hour days on land that's been bleeding money for 3 straight years. The drought killed his cattle. The bank wants his deed. His neighbors sold out to developers months ago. This 4th-generation ranch, once the pride of Copper Ridge, is dying, and everyone knows it. Everyone except Bo, who refuses to quit. He carries the weight of 3 generations on his shoulders. Working fields his grandfather cleared by hand, living in the house his father built board by board. Then one autumn morning, a city woman in expensive shoes steps out of a rental car and changes everything. Sophie Delacroix doesn't know a thing about ranching, but she sees possibilities where Bo sees only problems. What happens when fresh eyes meet stubborn pride? Can love really bloom in barren soil? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cuts through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30, same as it has every morning for 34 years. Bo Larkin's hand finds the snooze button with practiced precision, but his body is already moving. Muscle memory, overriding the desire to stay buried under worn quilts his grandmother stitched by hand. Outside, October frost paints the Montana landscape in silver, and the Rocky Mountains stand sentinel against a sky just beginning to blush with sunrise. His bare feet hit the cold hardwood floors that creak in all the familiar places. Loose, bored by the bedroom door, soft spot near the window where Danny used to sneak out for midnight adventures. The house holds 42 years of his memories, 3 generations of Larkin voices echoing in these rooms. Some mornings, the silence feels heavier than others. This is one of those mornings. The kitchen welcomes him with the lingering scent of yesterday's coffee and the weight of unpaid bills stacked on the table like autumn leaves. He fills the electric percolator, the same one his mother used until the cancer took her 10 years ago, and sets it to brewing while he pulls on yesterday's jeans and a flannel shirt, soft with age. The ritual matters more than efficiency. Structure keeps a man grounded when everything else feels like it's sliding toward the edge. Through the kitchen window, the barn stands dark against the lightening sky. Empty stalls wait inside, vacant since he sold the last of his cattle to pay the mortgage. 20 head of prime Angus, gone to a rancher 3 counties over who still had grass and hope in equal measure. Bo tells himself it's temporary, that come spring he'll restock if the rains return and the bank shows mercy. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're 42 years old and running out of tomorrows. The coffee finishes percolating with a satisfied gurgle. He pours it into a chipped ceramic mug his brother Danny made in high school pottery class, the glaze uneven and the handle slightly crooked. Danny's been gone 8 years now, killed by an IED outside Kandahar while serving with the National Guard. The army sent home a folded flag and a citation for valor, but they couldn't send home the plans Danny had for modernizing the ranch. The enthusiasm he brought to every conversation about sustainable grazing and water conservation. Bo wraps his fingers around the mug's warmth and lets the coffee's bitter comfort chase away the morning chill. Outside, Tom Hendrick's pickup truck winds down the gravel road, headlights cutting through the gathering dawn. Tom's place borders the Larkin spread to the east, or did before he sold half his acreage to Henderson Development last spring. Now suburban castles rise where cattle used to graze, their manicured lawns an insult to 3 years of drought. The pickup pulls into the yard, and Tom climbs out with the careful movements of a man whose joints remind him daily that 70 years of ranch work extract their price. His weathered face carries the same exhaustion Bo sees in his own mirror, the look of men who've loved the land long enough to watch it break their hearts. Morning, Bo. Tom's breath forms small clouds in the crisp air as he approaches the porch. Saw your lights on early. Same time every morning. Bo steps outside, coffee warming his hands against the morning chill. You're up early yourself. Tom nods toward the hills where construction crews will soon be stirring. Hard to sleep with all that hammering. Thought I was getting used to it, but he shakes his head, studying boots that have walked this land for decades. Feels wrong, watching houses grow where we used to move cattle. They stand in comfortable silence, two men who've worked this land long enough to speak in shared glances and understood gestures. Tom's boots are newer than Bo's, his truck less dented. The Henderson money bought him breathing room, but it also bought him regret that sits heavy on his shoulders. Bank called again yesterday, Tom says finally. Asked if I thought you might be reconsidering their offer. What did you tell them? Told them to mind their own business. Tom's grin lacks its usual warmth, but they're persistent, I'll give them that. Money talks louder these days than common sense or neighbor loyalty. Money always talked loud. Question is whether you're listening. Tom studies his boots, scuffed leather that's seen honest work, but won't see much more. I listen. To everything these days. Mortgage payments, property taxes, the sound of my joints creaking when I get out of bed. He looks up, eyes serious. I listen to my grandson asking why Grandpa doesn't have any cows anymore. The words hang between them like morning mist, full of things better left unsaid. Tom's decision makes sense, made sense for a dozen ranchers in the valley who've sold to developers over the past 5 years. But sense and satisfaction aren't the same thing, and every man who's taken Henderson's money carries the weight of that truth. Coffee's hot if you want some, Bo offers. Appreciate it, but Martha's got breakfast waiting. Tom starts toward his truck, then pauses. You know, Bo, there's no shame in knowing when to quit. Sometimes the smartest thing a man can do is know when he's beat. My grandfather never taught me how to quit. Your grandfather never faced a 3-year drought with cattle prices in the basement and property taxes through the roof. Tom's voice carries the patience of long friendship. Different times call for different choices. Bo watches his neighbor drive away, dust plume trailing behind the pickup like a question mark against the morning sky. Different choices. The phrase echoes in his mind as he drains his coffee and prepares to face another day of impossible mathematics and stubborn hope. After Tom's truck disappears behind the morning dust, Bo returns to the kitchen table where reality waits in neat, unforgiving stacks. Bank statements, overdue notices, tax bills, all arranged with the careful precision of a man who's learned that ignoring problems doesn't make them disappear. The numbers tell the same story they've been telling for 3 years. The Larkin ranch is dying a slow, mathematical death. He pulls the latest foreclosure notice from the pile, envelope still crisp despite being opened and refolded a dozen times. $78,000. That's what stands between staying and going, between keeping his promise to 3 generations of Larkin men and watching strangers carve up the land his grandfather cleared with nothing but determination and a borrowed mule. The notice bears the official seal of First National Bank of Copper Ridge, signed by Harold Wessling, a man who's known Bo since childhood. Harold played high school football with Danny, dated Bo's cousin Sarah for 2 summers. Now he's the assistant manager who gets to deliver foreclosure papers to families he grew up alongside. The personal nature of small-town business doesn't make the numbers any less final. Bo unfolds his father's reading glasses, wire-rimmed and slightly bent from years of careful use, and studies the payment schedule one more time. The numbers dance behind tired eyes, adding up to the same impossible sum. 78,000 would disappear into corporate pockets like water into sand, leaving behind subdivisions with names like Rocky Mountain Estates and Prairie Wind Village. Suburban fantasies built on the bones of working ranches. His grandfather's voice echoes from 40 years past. Land ain't just dirt and grass, boy. It's a promise. Promise to the generations that came before. Promise to the ones coming after. You hold that promise sacred, you hear? What generations coming after? Bo's 42, never married, no children to carry forward the family name or the family burden. His cousins moved to Seattle and Denver years ago, chasing careers that don't require getting up before dawn or praying for rain. The Larkin line stops with him, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe some promises are too heavy for one man to keep. He sets down the glasses and walks to the kitchen window, studying the land that's been his whole world since birth. 320 acres of rolling pasture and hay fields, bounded by mountains that have watched over this valley since before human dreams divided it into property lines. His great-grandfather homesteaded here in 1892, proved up the claim by building the original cabin and breaking 40 acres of virgin prairie with a walking plow. Each generation had added something. His grandfather expanded the grazing range and built the big barn. His father installed the first irrigation system and improved the hayfields. Beau's contribution has been more modest. A few equipment upgrades, some fence improvements, and 3 years of fighting to keep it all from slipping away. Not exactly the legacy he'd planned to leave. The barn holds memories worth more than money, but less than debt payments. His grandfather teaching him to milk cows in the pre-dawn darkness, patient hands guiding small fingers until the rhythm became natural. His father showing him how to read the weather, to smell rain in the wind hours, before the first clouds appeared. Danny planning improvements they'd never have the chance to implement. Dreams cut short by duty to something larger than himself. Inside that barn hangs his father's cattle brand, the Larkin L with a circle around it, registered with the state for 60 years but unused for 3. The branding iron sits cold in its mount, waiting for cattle that may never return. Beau could sell it as scrap metal, but some things shouldn't be reduced to their weight in steel. The kitchen holds its own catalogue of memories. His mother's recipe. Cards, handwritten in careful script, filed alphabetically in a wooden box his father made in shop class. Sunday dinners around the oak table that seats 8, but hasn't seen a full house since Danny's funeral. The mark on the doorframe where his father measured Beau's height every birthday. Penciled lines climbing steadily until they stopped at 6 feet, even on his 18th birthday. Henderson Development's latest offer sits in the pile, professionally printed on heavy paper that suggests serious money and corporate confidence. They've sweetened the deal 3 times this year, each offer higher than the last. Enough to pay off the debt, relocate somewhere cheaper, maybe start over with a small spread in Wyoming or the Dakotas. The practical choice, the smart choice, the choice that honors financial reality over sentimental attachment. But as he finishes his coffee and prepares for another day of necessary work on impossible land, something deep in his chest rebels against the notion of surrender. This place isn't just property to be bought and sold. It's home, it's history. It's the sum of every sunrise his family has witnessed from this exact spot, every storm they've weathered, every small victory they've celebrated in the shadow of these mountains. The work waits, as it always does. Fence repairs that can't wait much longer. Hay to move from the lower barn before the roof gives way completely. A dozen small battles in a war he's not sure he can win but hasn't yet figured out how to surrender. Beau pulls on his father's work gloves, leather worn smooth by decades of honest work, and heads outside to meet another day of stubborn hope against impossible odds. The sun climbs higher, burning off the morning frost and revealing another day of choices that shouldn't have to be made on land, that should never have to be sold. The black sedan appears in Beau's driveway like a mirage, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon sun with urban arrogance. From his position mending fence in the north pasture, Beau watches the car navigate his rutted drive with the careful precision of someone unaccustomed to gravel roads and honest dirt. City car, no doubt about it. Probably another Henderson Development scout coming to sweeten their latest offer with corporate smiles and carefully calculated charm. He sets down his wire cutters and walks toward the house, boots finding familiar. Hollows in the path his father wore smooth over decades of daily rounds. The sedan parks near the front porch, engine ticking as it cools. Through the windshield, he makes out the silhouette of a woman checking her reflection in the rear-view mirror, smoothing hair that probably cost more to style than he spends on groceries in a month. The door opens, and out steps someone who clearly doesn't belong in his world. She's younger than he expected, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back in a way that suggests both practicality and expense. Her clothes speak of city confidence: tailored jacket, crisp white blouse, pants that have never known honest work. But it's the shoes that really tell the story, designer heels that click against the gravel like a foreign language. Mr. Larkin, her voice carries East Coast education and professional polish. I'm Sophie Delacroix. I was hoping we could talk. Beau stops 20 feet from the porch, close enough to be polite, far enough to maintain his own ground. He removes his hat, a gesture of respect his grandfather taught him, but his posture remains wary. If you're with Henderson Development, I'm not. She pulls a manila folder from a leather briefcase that probably costs more than his monthly grocery budget. The briefcase is immaculate, expensive, everything about it screaming corporate success and urban sophistication. I inherited property from my grandmother, Margaret Connolly, the old Connolly place, about 2 miles east of here. The name hits him like a fist to the chest. Maggie Connolly, who died last winter at 91, stubborn and proud to the end. Her little farm had been abandoned for years before that, the house slowly collapsing under the weight of time and neglect. He'd driven past it countless times, watching weeds reclaim what had once been tidy gardens, watching the barn slowly lean toward inevitable surrender. Maggie was your grandmother? Apparently so. Sophie's professional smile falters slightly, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. I never really knew her. Family politics, you understand, but according to the lawyers, she left me 40 acres and whatever's left of the buildings. Beau replaces his hat and studies this unexpected inheritor of his neighbor's legacy. Sophie, Delacroix doesn't look like someone who belongs on a failing farm in rural Montana. Everything about her suggests boardrooms and business lunches, not barnyards and broken water pumps. I'm sorry for your loss. Maggie was good people, tough as winter and twice as stubborn, but good people. Thank you. Sophie's professional demeanor softens genuinely. I was hoping you might be able to tell me more about the property. I drove out there this morning and, well, it's not exactly what I expected. That draws a bark of laughter from Beau. City expectations don't translate well to country reality. What were you hoping to find? Sophie shifts her weight, heels seeking stable purchase on the uneven ground. Honestly, I'm not sure. I work in marketing in Chicago. When the lawyers called, I thought maybe it was a sign. Time for a change, you know? I've been burning out. On the corporate grind, pulling 60-hour weeks for clients who don't appreciate good work. She glances around, taking in the worn buildings and empty pastures with eyes that see problems where he sees possibilities. I thought maybe I could fix up the farm, turn it into a retreat center or bed and breakfast, something peaceful. The innocence in her voice would be charming if it weren't so dangerous. Beau's seen enough city folk fall in love with the romantic idea of rural life, only to flee when reality sets in. They come with dreams of morning sunrises and evening serenades, but they never stay for the first winter storm or the third broken water pump or the reality of neighbors 20 miles away. You know anything about farming? No, but I'm a quick learner. Her chin lifts with determination that reminds him painfully of his grandfather's stubbornness. I've been researching online. There are grants available for sustainable agriculture, programs to help beginning farmers who know which end of a cow to milk. The words come out harsher than intended, but Beau doesn't soften them. Better she understand. And then learn the hard way. This isn't some weekend hobby you can pick up from YouTube videos. This is hard work that breaks your back and your heart with equal enthusiasm. Color rises in Sophie's cheeks and her grip tightens on the expensive briefcase. I didn't come here for a lecture on my limitations. I came here for information about my property and maybe some neighborly advice. If you're too busy feeling superior to help, I can figure it out myself. There's steel under that city polish, Beau realizes. Not just professional confidence, but something deeper. The kind of determination that keeps people moving forward when common sense says quit. He's seen it in his grandfather's eyes, felt it in his own chest during the worst moments of the past 3 years. Maggie's place needs about $50,000 in repairs before it's fit for human habitation, he says, his voice gentler now. The roof leaks, the plumbing's shot, and the electrical system's old enough to be a fire hazard. The barn's ready to fall down, and the well probably needs to be redug. That's before you start thinking about business permits, insurance, marketing, and all the other complications that come with running a hospitality operation. Sophie's professional smile falters, but her determination doesn't. Then I guess I better get started. Something in Sophie's tone catches Beau's attention, not the bravado of someone who doesn't understand the challenge, but the quiet resolution of someone who's faced impossible odds before. It's a tone he recognizes because he's heard it in his own voice during the long nights when the numbers don't add up and the future looks dark. You got experience with construction? I managed office renovations in Chicago. Different scale, but the principles are similar. Sophie adjusts her grip on the briefcase, and Beau notices her hands aren't as soft as he'd expected. There are small calluses at the base of her fingers, the kind that come from actual work, not just pushing papers. You got $50,000. For repairs. Her pause tells him everything he needs to know. I'll find a way. You got any idea what you're really signing up for? Another pause, longer this time. When she speaks, her voice carries a vulnerability that cuts through her professional armor. I know I can't keep living the life I'm living. I know I wake up every morning in a city that doesn't feel like home, working for people who treat me like a replaceable part. I know I drive to work through traffic that makes me want to scream, sit in meetings that accomplish nothing, then come home to an empty apartment and wonder what I'm doing with my life. She looks out across his empty pastures, and for a moment the city facade completely drops away. I know that when I stood in my grandmother's kitchen this morning, with the sunlight coming through windows, she probably looked through for 70 years. I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. Peace, like maybe I was finally where I belonged. The honesty in her voice disarms him completely. He spent 3 years carrying the weight of this place alone, convinced that no one else could understand the pull of land that demands everything and gives back heartbreak. But there's something in Sophie Delacroix's eyes, a hunger for belonging, that mirrors his own desperate need to stay rooted. Tell me about Maggie, Sophie says suddenly. The lawyers gave me the basics, but they didn't know her. What was she like? Beau leans against his truck, surprised by the request. Most city inheritors want to know about property values and development potential, not family history. Maggie was complicated. Came here as a war bride in 1947, married. Billy Connolly after he got back from the Pacific. Billy was my grandfather's best friend, so our families were close. He pauses, remembering the tough old woman who'd outlived her husband by 30 years. She was stubborn as a Montana winter and twice as unforgiving when crossed. But she had a mind like a steel trap and a heart bigger than she let most people see. After Billy died, she kept that place running by herself for 20 years before age finally slowed her down. What happened to the farm? Why did she let it go? Maggie never let anything go by choice. Beau's voice carries the weight of watching a neighbor's dreams slowly collapse. But farming's a young person's game, and she was past 80, no children to help, no family close enough to care. The last few years, she was basically maintaining the house and letting the rest go wild. Sophie reaches into her briefcase and pulls out a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Margaret Connolly's handwritten correspondence, decades of careful script on cream-colored stationery. I found these in the house. Letters between her and someone named Edmund. They talk about crops, weather, shared equipment. Edmund was my father. Beau takes the letters with reverence, recognizing his father's careful handwriting on the envelopes. He and Maggie were neighbors for 40 years. She'd borrow our hay baler. He'd help her with cattle when Billy was sick. That's how neighbors worked back then. You helped because you might need help yourself someday. There are business letters too. Discussions about market prices, cooperative buying, even some correspondence with the Agricultural Extension Office. Sophie's enthusiasm grows as she speaks. It's like a complete record of small-scale farming in this valley. Bo flips through the correspondence, seeing his family's history reflected through his neighbor's careful documentation. Here was his father's handwriting discussing drought strategies during the dry spell of '88. Here was Maggie's response, outlining water conservation techniques she'd learned from her father-in-law, who'd farmed through the Dust Bowl. Your grandmother was always talking about writing a history of the valley, he says, studying a letter from 1995 about cooperative marketing efforts. Looks like she was collecting material for decades. There's more. Sophie pulls out a thick folder marked with Maggie's precise handwriting, sustainable practices, future plans. She had detailed notes about organic farming methods, croppy, rotation schedules, even sketches for direct-to-consumer marketing setups. Bo examines the folder's contents with growing amazement. Maggie's notes reveal a mind decades ahead of its time, documenting experiments with companion planting, natural pest control, and water conservation that modern sustainable agriculture is just rediscovering. Her sketches show plans for a farmer's market booth, designs for value-added processing, even preliminary layouts for agri-tourism facilities. She was trying to prove that small farms could compete with industrial agriculture. Sophie continues, her voice filled with growing excitement. Look at this. Detailed plans for diversified income streams, customer relationship management, even environmental impact studies. Reading through Maggie's notes, Bo feels a familiar stirring, the same excitement his grandfather used to show when discussing new methods or sharing wisdom with younger generations. Here was a woman who understood that farming isn't just about working the land, but learning from it, adapting to its rhythms, finding ways to thrive within natural cycles rather than fighting against them. Why didn't she implement any of this? Sophie's expression grows thoughtful as she studies a detailed business plan dated 10 years earlier. From what I can tell, she started planning this about 10 years ago, but she was already in her 80s. Too old to start over, but still sharp enough to see the possibilities. She looks around the dusty barnyard with new eyes. Maybe that's why she left it to me. Maybe she hoped someone younger might finish what she started. The weight of inherited dreams settles between them like morning mist. Bo knows the feeling intimately, carrying forward the hopes and plans of previous generations, trying to honor their vision while facing realities they never imagined. Ambitious plans don't guarantee success, he says gently. Your grandmother understood farming in ways that take decades to learn. Book knowledge only gets you so far, so then I'll need a good teacher. Sophie meets his eyes directly. Someone who understands both the old ways and the new challenges. 3 days later, Bo hears the hammering start at sunrise. From his kitchen window, he can see smoke rising from Maggie Connolly's old chimney, the first time in 5 years. By the time he finishes his morning coffee, curiosity gets the better of him. He drives the 2 miles to the Connolly place, telling himself it's just neighborly concern. The scene that greets him defies every expectation. Sophie Delacroix stands on a ladder propped against the sagging front porch, hammer in hand, hair pulled back under a blue Cubs baseball cap that's clearly seen better days. She's traded her designer clothes for work jeans and a flannel shirt that hangs loose on her city-soft frame, the sleeves rolled up to reveal arms already showing the first signs of honest labor. The Cubs cap sits like a declaration of intent on her head, faded, comfortable, speaking of weekend games and neighborhood loyalty rather than corporate image management. It transforms her completely from the polished professional who stepped out of the black sedan just days ago. "Morning!" Bo calls from his truck window. Sophie turns, hammer still raised, and her face lights up with a smile that transforms her. Completely. Gone is the polished professional from 3 days ago, replaced by someone flushed with exertion and purpose, someone who looks like she belongs on a ladder with a hammer in her hand. Perfect timing. She climbs down the ladder with movements that suggest unfamiliarity with manual labor, but determination to learn. "I was hoping you might stop by. I need to ask you about something I found in the barn." Bo parks and follows her across the yard, noting the changes already taking place. Someone, Sophie presumably, has cleared the weeds from around the house foundation and started stacking usable lumber separated from the rotted pieces. A pile of trash grows near the road, ready for pickup. Small improvements, but they suggest serious intent rather than weekend whim. The barn door hangs askew on rusted hinges, and Sophie approaches it with the caution of someone who's already learned to respect old buildings. Inside, filtered sunlight reveals the skeleton of what was once a respectable outbuilding. Hay still fills the loft, though mice have claimed most of it. Farm implements rust quietly in the shadows, a harrow, an old plough, tools that speak of decades when this place actually produced something. "I found these in the back corner," Sophie says, leading him toward a tarp-covered pile in the barn's depths. She pulls back the canvas to reveal wooden crates stamped with dates from the 1940s, their contents carefully preserved against time and weather. They're full of letters, photographs, farm records, like a family archive. Bo kneels beside the crates, recognizing his own grandfather's handwriting on some of the correspondence, letters between neighbors, records of cattle sales, photographs from community events when Copper Ridge Valley still had a community worth documenting. The past, laid out in careful chronology, preserved by a woman who understood the value of memory. "This is incredible," he murmurs, lifting a photograph of a barn raising from 1952. His grandfather's there, young and strong, working alongside neighbors who are all gone now. Men in work clothes and women in print dresses, children playing at the edges while the community came together to build something lasting. Maggie was always talking about writing a history of the valley. Looks like she was collecting material for decades. Sophie settles cross-legged beside him in the barn. Dust, her enthusiasm infectious despite her inexperience. The cub's cap shades her eyes as she sorts through documents with the careful reverence of someone handling treasure. There are business records too, crop yields, weather patterns, market prices going back to the 1940s. It's like a complete agricultural database. Your grandmother was thorough. Bo studies a ledger filled with Maggie's precise handwriting, every entry dated and categorized with scientific precision. She tracked everything. Rain amounts, frost dates, which fields produced best in dry years versus wet ones. Even notes about soil conditions and pest management. There's something else. Sophie pulls out a folder marked Sustainable Practices, Future Plans, her voice growing excited as she speaks. Inside, Maggie's careful notes detail experiments with organic farming, companion planting, water conservation techniques that were decades ahead of their time. She was researching methods that modern sustainable agriculture is just starting to embrace. Reading through Maggie's notes, Bo feels a familiar stirring, the same excitement his grandfather used to show when discussing new methods or sharing wisdom with younger generations. Here was a woman who understood that farming isn't just about working the land, but learning from it, adapting to its rhythms, finding ways to thrive within natural cycles rather than fighting against them. She was trying to prove that small farms could compete with industrial agriculture, Sophie continues, her voice filled with growing excitement. Look at this. Detailed plans for crop rotation, integrated pest management, direct-to-consumer marketing. She even sketched out designs for a farmer's market booth and calculated profit margins for value-added products. Bo examines the sketches, recognizing the careful planning of someone who'd spent a lifetime observing what worked and what didn't. Maggie's vision was ambitious, but grounded in practical experience, exactly the kind of thinking his own place needed. Why didn't she implement any of this? Sophie's expression grows thoughtful as she studies the detailed plans. From what I can tell, she started planning this about 10 years ago, but she was already in her 80s, too old to start over, but still sharp enough to see the possibilities. She looks around the dusty barn with new eyes, the cub's cap casting shadows across her determined face. Maybe that's why she left it to me. Maybe she hoped someone younger might finish what she started. The weight of inherited dreams settles between them like morning mist. Bo knows the feeling intimately, carrying forward the hopes and plans of previous generations, trying to honor their vision while facing realities they never imagined. But as he handles Margaret's sustainable practices folder, he realizes this isn't just wishful thinking preserved in yellowed paper. This is a roadmap drawn by someone who understood both the challenges and the possibilities. Look at this section. On water management, Sophie says, pulling out a detailed diagram showing terraced gardens and rainwater collection systems. Margaret's notes are meticulous, documenting everything from soil permeability rates to optimal plant spacing for companion crops. She calculated that proper water conservation could increase yield by 30% while reducing irrigation costs by half. Bo studies the diagrams with growing amazement. These aren't the pipe dreams of someone who read about farming in magazines. These are the carefully documented observations of someone who spent decades watching what worked and what didn't, someone who understood that survival meant adaptation. She was experimenting with heritage seeds too, Sophie continues, showing him manila envelopes carefully labeled with variety names and planting dates. Tomatoes from the 1920s, corn varieties that were drought-resistant before anyone cared about drought resistance. She was preserving genetic diversity while everybody else was chasing hybrid yields. The scope of Margaret's vision becomes clearer with each document. She wasn't just planning to save her own small farm. She was documenting a way of life, preserving knowledge that corporate agriculture dismisses, but that small-scale sustainable operations desperately need. Her notes reference conversations with university extension agents, correspondence with organic farming pioneers, even detailed records of what she learned from Native American farming techniques. Your grandmother was 50 years ahead of her time, Bo says, examining a business plan that outlines multiple revenue streams, fresh produce sales, value-added products like preserves and baked goods, agritourism activities, and educational workshops. This is exactly the kind of diversification that keeps small farms viable. She calculated everything, Sophie says, her marketing background evident as she points out detailed financial projections. Startup costs, break-even analysis, even seasonal cash flow projections. She knew it would take 3 years to establish the customer base and 5 years to achieve full profitability, but she proved it could work. Bo feels something shifting in his chest as he studies Margaret's careful planning. For 3 years, he's been fighting a losing battle with traditional ranching methods, trying to make 19th century practices work in 21st century economics. But here's evidence that someone else had faced the same challenges and found a different path forward. Ambitious plans don't guarantee success, he says carefully, testing his own resistance to hope. Your grandmother understood farming in ways that take decades to learn. Book knowledge only gets you so far. Then I'll need a good teacher. Sophie meets his eyes directly, and he sees something there that reminds him painfully of his grandfather's determination. Someone who understands both the old ways and the new challenges. The implication hangs in the air like morning mist. Bo feels the dangerous pull of possibility, the seductive whisper that maybe, just maybe, 2 struggling operations might succeed where one alone would fail. But he's learned to be cautious with hope, to test it against the harsh mathematics of debt and drought and diminishing returns. Teaching takes time I don't have much of. What if we helped each other? Sophie's words come faster now, as if she's afraid he'll shut down the conversation before she can make her case. You know the land, the climate, the practical side of farming. I know marketing, business development, how to navigate bureaucracy and access grants. Maybe together we could make something work that neither of us could manage alone. It's a seductive proposition, and Bo finds himself leaning toward it, despite every instinct screaming caution. 3 years of solitary struggle have worn down. His resistance to hope made him hungry for partnership in ways he hasn't allowed himself to acknowledge. Partnership's a big word, he says carefully. Lots of ways it can go wrong. Lots of ways it can go right too. Sophie stands, brushing barn dust from her jeans with hands that are already showing signs of calluses. Look, I know I'm the outsider here. I know I don't understand what I'm getting into. But I also know I can't keep living the life I was living. And you can't keep fighting alone against economics that were stacked against small farms long before the drought hit. She's right, and they both know it. The numbers don't lie. Individual operations throughout the valley have been failing one by one, sold off to developers or absorbed by larger corporate farms. Only collaboration offers any real hope of survival. What exactly are you proposing? Sophie pulls out a notebook, city habit, he assumes, writing everything down. But as she flips through pages of careful observations and detailed questions, he realizes this isn't corporate note-taking. This is the methodical documentation of someone genuinely trying to learn, someone who's already started thinking like a farmer, even if she doesn't yet know how to be one. I've been researching agritourism, sustainable farming practices, direct marketing, she says, her voice gaining confidence as she outlines her vision. There's a growing market for authentic experiences. People want to connect with where their food comes from, understand agricultural traditions, learn practical skills. Her eyes light up as she speaks, the cub's cap shadowing a face bright with possibility. What if we combined your working ranch with my grandmother's place? Use your land for actual farming, my place for hospitality and education. Offer farm stays, workshops, maybe even wedding venues in the restored barn. The scope of her thinking impresses him, despite his reservations. She's not just planning to restore one failing property. She's envisioning a completely different, economic model, one that treats the land as more than just a commodity to be maximized for short-term profit. Tourism's seasonal work, Bo points out, though his tone lacks the dismissive edge it carried 3 days ago. Farming's year-round, so we diversify. Sophie flips to another page in her notebook, revealing sketches and calculations that show she's been thinking about this seriously. Seasonal tourists, but also CSA subscriptions, farmers market sales, maybe value-added products like preserved foods or craft items, multiple revenue streams instead of depending entirely on cattle prices and rain. It's exactly the kind of creative thinking the valley needs, exactly the innovation his grandfather would have appreciated. But innovation requires capital, and capital is what both their operations lack. Bo examines a photograph from Margaret's archive, a community barn raising from 1954, neighbors working together to build something lasting. The black and white image shows his own grandfather as a young man, hammer in hand, working alongside Billy Connolly and a dozen other valley families. Their faces shine with sweat and satisfaction, children playing at the edges while women prepare a feast for the workers. This was a time when neighbors helped neighbors survive, when cooperation wasn't just idealistic, it was practical. You got money for all this development, he asks, though he's already guessing the answer from her earlier hesitation. Sophie's enthusiasm dims slightly, but her determination doesn't waver. I'm working on that. There are grants available for beginning farmers, especially women and sustainable agriculture projects. I'm also researching microloans, crowdfunding, maybe even finding investor partners who believe in the vision. Bo recognizes the optimism of someone who hasn't yet learned how slowly bureaucracy moves or how many qualified applicants compete for limited funding. But he also hears something else in her voice, the same stubborn determination that's kept him working this land despite every logical reason to quit. They spend the next 2 hours going through Margaret's archives, piecing together a picture of the valley's agricultural history, and the grandmother Sophie never really knew. With each document, each photograph, each carefully recorded observation, the scope of Margaret's vision becomes clearer. She wasn't just planning to save her own small farm, she was documenting a way of life, preserving knowledge that could help others navigate the same challenges. "Look at this," Sophie says, pulling out a folder marked Valley Cooperative 1962. Inside are meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence about a farmers' cooperative that operated for nearly 2 decades. 23 families, pooling resources for equipment purchases, shared marketing, even bulk buying of supplies. Bo studies the documents with growing recognition. He remembers his father mentioning the cooperative, though it had dissolved before Bo was old enough to understand its importance. What happened to it? According to these records, it worked well until the members started retiring or selling out. By 1981, there weren't enough participants to make it viable. Sophie's finger traces down a list of member families, most names now attached to subdivisions rather than working farms. But for 20 years it allowed small operations to compete with larger ones by sharing costs and resources. The parallels to their current situation aren't lost on either of them. Individual farms struggling in isolation while developers circle like vultures, waiting for financial exhaustion to force another sale. But the archive suggests a different possibility, that cooperation could provide the economic leverage that individual operations lack. "My grandfather always said farming was a community enterprise," Bo muses, examining photographs of shared harvests and group equipment purchases. One family might own the combine, another the hay baler, third the cattle chutes. Everybody contributed what they could. Everybody benefited from what others provided. That's exactly what Margaret was documenting, Sophie says, her excitement building again. Not just the practical arrangements, but the social structures that made them work. Trust, reciprocity, shared investment in everyone's success. Bo finds himself caught between hope and skepticism, drawn to Sophie's enthusiasm, but anchored by years of hard experience. Partnership means sharing not just dreams, but also risks, not just successes, but also failures. It means trusting someone else with decisions that could determine whether the land his grandfather loved survives or gets carved up for suburban development. But as he watches Sophie handle Margaret's documents with the same reverence he feels for his own family legacy, as he sees her genuine excitement about continuing work that Margaret started decades ago, something in his chest loosens for the first time in months. "You realize this isn't just about fixing up buildings and planting gardens," he says carefully. "This is about changing how we think about farming, about land use, about what constitutes success. You're talking about creating something that doesn't exist yet. Maybe that's exactly what we need." Sophie looks up from the photographs, her face serious despite the optimism in her voice. "Maybe the old ways of doing things aren't working because the world has changed. Maybe we need to honor the wisdom of the past while adapting to present realities." It's a sophisticated understanding that surprises him. She's not just a city dreamer romanticizing rural life. She's someone genuinely trying to understand the challenges and find practical solutions. The Cubs cap sits slightly askew on her head, a reminder of how much she's already changed in just 3 days of honest work. "Teaching partnership takes patience," Bo says finally, "from both sides. I'm a good student when the teacher believes in what he's teaching." Their eyes meet across Margaret's carefully preserved archive, and Bo feels something shift between them. Not just the possibility of business partnership, but the recognition of shared values, shared determination, shared willingness to fight for something worth preserving. Maybe Tom Hendricks was right about different times requiring different choices. Maybe the choice isn't between holding on alone and surrendering completely. Maybe there's a third option, one that honors the past while embracing change, one that treats partnership not as weakness, but as the kind of practical cooperation that built this valley in the first place. 2 weeks later, 2 weeks, Bo finds himself standing in Sophie's kitchen, holding Margaret's hand-drawn farm layout plans while she makes coffee on a camp stove. The old electric range died 3 days ago, another casualty in the long list of repairs the Connolly place demands. But Sophie approaches each setback with the methodical determination of someone who's learned that complaining doesn't fix broken appliances. "The fence line runs along here," she says, pointing to Margaret's careful sketches while stirring sugar into her coffee with a bent spoon. The Cubs cap has become her daily uniform, faded blue cotton that's already collected its share of paint spatter and barn dust. According to her notes, this section has the best soil drainage and morning sun exposure, perfect for the vegetable plots she was planning. Bo studies the drawings with professional interest. Margaret's layouts show an integrated system. Vegetable gardens feeding into composting areas, which feed into pasture rotation, which feeds back into soil improvement. It's the kind of holistic thinking that takes decades to develop, the understanding that every element of a farm ecosystem affects every other element. "She was right about the drainage," he says, looking out the kitchen window toward the sloping field Margaret had marked for cultivation. "That section never pools water, even in heavy rain years. Good choice for annual crops. Would you help me lay it out?" The question comes casually, but Bo hears the underlying request for partnership, for shared investment in making Margaret's vision real. "I can read the plans, but I don't have the experience to know if they'll actually work." It's a reasonable request from someone who's already proven her willingness to learn. Over the past 2 weeks, Sophie has attacked the restoration work with the focused intensity she probably brought to corporate projects. The difference is that here, her efforts create something tangible. Cleared garden plots, repaired fence posts, a barn that's beginning to look less like a ruin and more like a building with potential. "I could spare a morning," Bo says, though they both know it's more than neighborly assistance. It's the first step toward the partnership they've been circling around for weeks, testing the waters of collaboration without fully committing to the leap. They spend the next 3 hours walking Margaret's property with surveyor's tape and measuring stakes, translating her careful drawings into real boundaries on actual ground. Sophie's city background shows in her questions. She wants to understand not just what to do, but why it works. She asks about sun angles and drainage patterns, about companion planting and crop rotation, approaching farming like the complex system it actually is, rather than the simple fantasy most city people imagine. "Why did she plan the herb garden so close to the house?" Sophie asks, marking the corners of a rectangular plot just outside the kitchen door. "Convenience," Bo explains. "Driving a stake into ground that's been worked before, soil that remembers cultivation even after years of neglect. You cook with herbs daily, so you want them close. But also many herbs are natural pest deterrents. Plant them around your vegetables, and you reduce insect problems without chemicals." Sophie makes notes with the same methodical attention she's brought to everything else, documenting not just what to plant, but why it goes where. She's building her own knowledge base, creating the kind of practical understanding that can't be learned from books alone. By noon, they've laid out the entire garden plan, vegetable plots arranged for optimal sun exposure, herb gardens positioned for both convenience and pest control, compost bins located for easy access but downwind from the house. Margaret's vision takes physical form, marked with bright orange tape that transforms abstract planning into concrete possibility. "It's bigger than I imagined," Sophie says, surveying the network of marked plots that will, if everything goes according to plan, produce enough vegetables for farmers' market sales, plus value-added products like preserves and pickled goods. "Growing food takes space," Bo agrees, though he's impressed by the scope of her ambition. "You realize this represents about 40 hours of work per week during growing season? That's on top of whatever renovation work you're still doing on the house and barn." "Then I better get started." Sophie's determination hasn't wavered, but he hears acknowledgement of the challenge in her voice. Good thing I've got a patient teacher. The casual reference to ongoing partnership settles between them like an understood agreement. Neither has formally committed to anything, but they're both acting as if collaboration is already decided. Bo finds himself looking forward to these planning sessions, to Sophie's questions that force him to articulate knowledge he's always taken for granted. As they head back toward the house, Sophie stops suddenly, pointing toward a section of fence that borders Bo's property. What's that building over there? The one with the blue roof? Bo follows her gaze to his old equipment shed, a metal building that houses the farm machinery he can't afford to replace but can't bring himself to sell. Equipment storage, tractor, mower, hay rake. Most of it's older than you are, but it still runs. Would any of it work for this size operation? The question catches him off guard. Sophie's been planning as if she'll purchase all new equipment, but most small-scale farming operations start with used machinery, shared resources, cooperative arrangements that spread costs across multiple users. Some of it, the tractor's got plenty of life left, and the mower could handle your hayfields if you decide to keep them in grass. He pauses, recognizing another step toward partnership. Equipment sharing was how most small farms survived back when there were enough of them to make cooperation viable, like the Valley Cooperative Margaret documented. Exactly like that. Bo finds himself smiling at her quick understanding. One farm owns the expensive machinery, rents it to neighbors at cost. Everybody benefits. Nobody carries the full financial burden alone. Sophie's eyes light up with the same excitement. He's been seeing more often. The look of someone who's found a puzzle piece that makes the whole picture clearer. So we could share resources while we're getting established, pool our equipment and expertise until both operations are strong enough to stand alone, or strong enough to formalize the partnership, Bo says, surprised by his own words. 2 weeks ago, he wouldn't have imagined suggesting formal collaboration. Now it seems like the natural evolution of what they're already building together. The rejection letter arrives on a Tuesday morning that dawns grey and cold, October frost painting the valley in shades of silver disappointment. Sophie finds it mixed in with the usual collection of bills and advertisements, the official envelope, from the Montana Beginning Farmer Grant Program, thick enough to suggest good news. Instead, it contains 3 pages of polite refusal and bureaucratic explanation for why her application doesn't meet current funding priorities. She reads it twice before walking the 2 miles to Bo's place, the letter clutched in her hand like evidence of failure. She finds him in the barn, cleaning his father's cattle brand with steel wool and oil, working the rust from metal that hasn't been used in 3 years, but still carries the weight of family identity. The Larkin brand, an L enclosed in a circle, represents 4 generations of registered cattle operations legally filed with the state since 1952. Bo handles it with the reverence other men might reserve for family heirlooms, which in every way that matters, it is. The brand is more than a mark of ownership. It's a declaration of presence, a statement that Larkin cattle grazed these pastures and carried this mark to market year after year. $30,000, Sophie says without preamble, holding up the rejection letter. That's what they approved for more established operations with demonstrated agricultural experience. I qualified for exactly 0. Bo sets down the steel wool and examines the letter, his expression unreadable. The branding iron rests across his knees, clean metal gleaming despite years of disuse. First rejection's always the hardest. What was their reason? Insufficient agricultural background, unclear business model, unrealistic timeline projections. Sophie's voice carries the flat tone of someone reading her own professional obituary. Basically, they want to fund people who already know what they're doing, not people trying to learn. Catch-22, Bo observes, returning his attention to the brand. Can't get experience without funding. Can't get funding without experience. Systems designed to keep newcomers out. The practical acceptance in his voice both comforts and frustrates her. Sophie has spent 3 weeks learning to think like a farmer, to plan for seasons and weather patterns and crop rotations. But bureaucracy operates on different logic, rewarding credentials over commitment, experience over enthusiasm. There are other grants, she says, though her confidence has taken a beating. Private foundations, agricultural development funds, even some corporate sponsors for sustainable farming initiatives, all with their own requirements and application deadlines. Bo runs his thumb along the brand's edge, testing its sharpness against his skin. Meanwhile, winter's coming, and spring planting decisions need to be made by February. They sit in comfortable silence while dust motes dance in the barn's filtered sunlight. Outside, the wind carries the scent of coming snow, the particular crispness that warns of Montana winter approaching with its usual indifference to human plans. Sophie's first winter in the valley will be a test of commitment that no amount of research can prepare her for. "Tell me about this," she says, gesturing toward the branding iron. "When did you last use it?" 3 years ago, last time I had cattle to brand." Bo's voice carries the weight of abandoning tradition. "Dad used this iron for 28 years. Never missed a branding season. His father before him for 36 years. Family joke was that the brand knew its way to the fire by itself." Sophie studies the simple design, recognizing the history it represents. "Will you use it again, if I can find a way to restock?" Bo sets the iron across his workbench, metal ringing against wood with finality. Cattle prices are up, which is good news if you're selling, bad news if you're buying. Takes about 40,000 to establish a decent breeding herd these days. The number hangs between them like a challenge. 40,000 for cattle, 30,000 for Sophie's infrastructure improvements, plus ongoing operating expenses and the ever-present debt service on Bo's existing obligations. The mathematics of farming remains stubbornly unforgiving. "What if we approached this differently?" Sophie asks, the rejection letter forgotten as her mind shifts into problem-solving mode. "Instead of applying for grants separately, what if we developed a joint proposal, a comprehensive plan for sustainable agriculture that includes both properties?" Bo looks up from the branding iron, interested despite his caution. "Joint application? Think about it. Together we have more acreage, more diverse plans, a combination of experience and innovation that might appeal to funders looking for model projects." Sophie's enthusiasm builds as she speaks. "Your knowledge, plus my business planning, your established operation, plus my development plans. We could position it as a demonstration project for rural economic development. It's an intriguing possibility, and Bo finds himself considering angles he hadn't seen before. Partnership applications often receive better consideration than individual requests, especially when they demonstrate community collaboration and knowledge transfer between generations. "Would require some formal partnership agreement," he says carefully. "Can't apply for joint funding without joint legal structure. Would that bother you? Making it official?" The question forces him to examine feelings he's been avoiding for weeks. Partnership means vulnerability, means trusting someone else with decisions that affect land his family has worked for 4 generations. But it also means sharing the burden that's been breaking his back and his heart for 3 solitary years. "Means we're committed to making this work," he says finally. "No backing out when the first winter storm hits or the first crop fails." "I'm not planning to back out." Sophie's voice carries quiet conviction. "I've spent 15 years in a life that wasn't really mine. I'm not giving up the first thing that's felt like home since I was a child." The honesty in her words settles something in Bo's chest, some fear he's been carrying about city people who treat rural life like a romantic adventure. Sophie hasn't shown any signs of romance about the work, just steady determination to learn and adapt and build something lasting. "Partnership's a big step," he says, testing the weight of commitment. "So is everything else we're planning." Sophie gestures toward the garden plots they've laid out, the restoration work already underway, the future they've been building one conversation at a time. "Question is whether we're stronger together than apart." The branding iron rests between them, waiting for cattle that may or may not return, for decisions that may or may not prove wise, for partnerships that may or may not survive the tests ahead. But for the first time in months, the weight of uncertainty feels shared rather than solitary. The Copper Ridge Farmers Market operates every Saturday morning in the empty lot behind Morrison's Hardware, a modest affair that serves 3 small towns and the scattered ranch families who still work the valley. Sophie studies the farmer's market application in her hands. 2 pages of straightforward questions about products, insurance, and booth fees, while Bo loads the last crates of late-season vegetables into his pickup truck. Their first market day arrives crisp and clear, October sunshine painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. They've spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment, harvesting the final vegetables from Margaret's restored garden plots, cleaning and sorting produce that Sophie hopes will prove there's a market for small-scale, locally grown food. The application itself represents something larger than permission to sell vegetables. It's their first concrete step toward the new economic model they've been planning, their first test of whether Sophie's marketing skills can meet Bo's agricultural knowledge in the practical arena of actual customers with real money. Nervous? Bo asks as they drive toward town, truck bed loaded with crates of late tomatoes, winter squash, and the last of the season's herbs. Terrified, Sophie admits, adjusting her Cubs cap and checking her appearance in the side mirror. She's learned to dress for market, clean jeans, practical boots, a jacket that suggests competence without intimidating customers who might be wary of city sophistication. I've given presentations to corporate executives, but I've never tried to convince strangers to buy vegetables I grew myself. The farmer's market unfolds around them like a small-town ritual that's played out for generations. A dozen vendors set up folding tables and pop-up canopies, arranging their offerings with the pride of people who've grown, made or raised everything they're selling. Hand-knitted scarves next to homemade jam, fresh bread beside late-season apples, the kind of direct connection between producer and consumer that industrial agriculture has almost eliminated. Their booth space sits between Martha Hendricks with her famous apple pies and the Yazzie family with their beautiful hand-woven rugs. Sophie arranges their modest selection with the same attention to visual appeal she once brought to corporate marketing displays, creating an attractive presentation from vegetables that taste better than they look. First time at market? Martha asks, her weathered hands arranging pies with practiced efficiency. At 72, she's been selling baked goods here for 15 years, since the farmer's market started as a way to keep downtown Copper Ridge alive after the mine closed. First time selling vegetables, Sophie confirms, nervous energy making her hands shake slightly as she arranges bundles of herbs. Sophie Delacroix. I inherited the old Connolly place. Maggie's granddaughter. Martha's face lights up with genuine warmth. Heard you were fixing up the old farm. About time that place had someone who appreciated what Maggie built there. The recognition feels like acceptance, Sophie realizes. In a small community where family connections matter more than professional credentials, being known as Maggie's granddaughter carries weight that no amount of corporate experience could provide. The morning starts slowly. Early customers browse with the careful consideration of people who know the value of $1, examining produce with knowledgeable eyes that can spot quality or identify problems Sophie's inexperienced gaze might miss. She watches Bo interact with customers, quiet conversations about growing conditions, weather patterns, the challenges of farming in a drought year, and learns that selling at farmers market requires different skills than corporate presentations. These tomatoes are beautiful, says a woman Sophie doesn't recognize, hefting a large red beefsteak with obvious appreciation. What variety? Sophie glances at Bo, realizing she doesn't know the answer to what should be a basic question. They're an heirloom variety that my grandmother was growing. Margaret documented everything, but I'm still learning the details. Brandywine, Bo supplies smoothly. Maggie grew them from seeds her mother-in-law brought from Pennsylvania. 100-year-old genetics, probably better flavor than anything you'll find in the supermarket. The customer's face brightens with interest. Heritage vegetables with family. Stories appeal to people who shop farmers markets. Sophie realizes they're not just buying produce, they're buying connection to place, to history, to farming traditions that corporate agriculture has abandoned. By noon, they've sold 2/3 of their vegetables and all of the herbs. Not enough money to pay significant bills, but enough to prove the concept works. People will pay premium prices for quality produce, especially when it comes with stories about heritage varieties and sustainable growing practices. Not bad for beginners, Martha observes as they pack up remaining inventory. Maggie would be proud to see her plants feeding the community again. Driving home with empty crates and a modest profit, Sophie feels something shift in her understanding of what they're building. The farmers market isn't just about generating revenue, it's about rebuilding connections between rural producers and local consumers, creating the kind of community relationships that support small-scale agriculture. We'll need more variety next season, she says, already planning improvements. Lettuce, carrots, maybe some of those specialty herbs restaurants are looking for. And we should consider value-added products. Margaret's notes mention preserves and pickled vegetables. Getting ambitious, Beau observes, but his tone carries approval rather than caution. The morning's success has energized them both, provided tangible proof that their partnership can create something valuable. Getting realistic, Sophie corrects. We proved people will buy what we're growing. Now we need to grow more of what people want to buy. The farmer's market application sits between them on the truck seat, stamped and approved, representing their first official step toward the economic model they've been planning. Small victory, but victories count when you're building something from nothing, when you're trying to prove that traditional wisdom and innovative thinking can create sustainable success. As they drive through the valley toward home, Sophie notices details she's learned to see over the past months: soil conditions, water availability, the way afternoon light falls across potential growing areas. She's thinking like a farmer now, planning for seasons she hasn't yet experienced, calculating possibilities she's only beginning to understand. Next week we should bring samples, she says, already strategizing. Let people taste the difference heritage varieties make. Word of mouth is everything in a community this size. Now you're thinking like a marketer who understands farming, Beau agrees. Dangerous combination. The Chicago job offer arrives on a Wednesday morning in late November, delivered by FedEx to ensure Sophie receives it before the deadline. The envelope bears the logo of Hartwell and Associates, the marketing firm where she worked for 8 years before burning out and fleeing to Montana. Inside, a formal letter details an offer for Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, complete with salary figures that make her pause mid-sip of her morning coffee. The numbers are staggering. Base salary of $120,000, plus bonuses, plus benefits, plus stock options, in a company that's been growing steadily for 5 years. Enough money to solve every financial problem she and Beau have been struggling with. Enough security to eliminate the constant worry about grant applications and loan payments and whether they can make their partnership sustainable. She reads the letter twice before folding it carefully and placing it on the kitchen table beside Margaret's wedding rings, which she's taken to wearing since finding them last week. The contrast isn't lost on her, symbols of commitment to place and person versus symbols of financial security and professional achievement. The job offer represents everything she thought she wanted when she left Chicago 6 months ago. Recognition of her skills, validation of her professional worth, the kind of career opportunity that doesn't come along often in a competitive field. But it also represents returning to the life she fled, the 60-hour weeks and meaningless meetings and empty apartment that drove her to inherit a failing farm from a grandmother she barely knew. By noon, she can't avoid the subject any longer. She drives to Beau's place, and finds him winterizing equipment in the barn, draining fluids and greasing fittings with the methodical attention that farming demands. He's wearing his father's old work jacket, wool-lined canvas that's been patched and repatched over decades of use. "Got a job offer," she says without preamble, holding up the letter that's been burning a hole in her pocket all morning. Bo straightens from the tractor he's been servicing, his expression carefully neutral in the way she's learned means he's processing something significant. Chicago, senior VP position, substantial salary increase, stock options. She hands him the letter, watching his face as he reads the details that represent financial salvation and personal retreat in equal measure. His reaction surprises her with its lack of surprise. "Figured it was only a matter of time before they tried to get you back. You're too good at what you do to stay hidden in Montana forever." "I'm not hidden. I'm building something." "Are you?" The question comes gently, but it cuts deeper than accusation might have. "Because some days I look at what we're doing and wonder if we're building something sustainable or just postponing the inevitable." The honesty in his voice forces her to examine doubts she's been avoiding for weeks. Their partnership has potential, but potential doesn't pay bills or guarantee success. The farmer's market brings in modest income, but nowhere near enough to support two people and maintain two properties. Grant applications remain pending with uncertain outcomes. Winter approaches with heating bills and equipment repairs, and the kind of expenses that test commitment to rural dreams. The offer expires Friday, Sophie says, settling on a hay bale while Bo continues his work. They need an answer by close. "Of business. That's not much time. It's enough time to know what I want." She pauses, testing the weight of certainty against the reality of uncertainty. "The question is whether what I want is realistic." Bo sets down his wrench and faces her directly. "What do you want?" The simple question demands a complex answer. Sophie wants financial security, but she also wants the satisfaction of growing food with her own hands. She wants professional recognition, but she also wants the community connection she's built at the farmer's market. She wants the safety of a predictable salary, but she also wants the risk and reward of building something new with someone she's come to love. "I want this to work," she says finally. "I want us to work, but I also want to be practical about our chances." "Practical," says "take the job." Bo's voice carries no resentment, just the clear-eyed assessment of someone who spent 3 years fighting losing battles against mathematics. 120,000 would solve both our problems, leave you with enough to invest in. This place is a weekend project or vacation home. I didn't come here for a vacation home. I came here because the life I was living wasn't really living. And Chicago's still Chicago, still traffic and meetings and corporate politics, still everything that made you want to leave in the first place. They sit in silence while late afternoon light filters through the barn's dusty windows. Outside, November wind carries the promise of winter, the particular cold that warns of months when survival depends on preparation and partnership, and the kind of stubborn determination that keeps people working when easier options exist. "If I stay, I need to know you're committed to making this work," Sophie says. "Not just willing to try, but committed to fighting for it when fighting gets hard. If you go, I'll probably end up selling to Henderson Development by spring." Bo's admission carries the weight of final choices. Can't keep this up alone much longer. The letter rests between them like a test of everything they've built together. Trust, partnership, love, the fragile hope that two people with different backgrounds can create something neither could achieve alone. Sophie feels the weight of choosing not just her own future, but the future of the land Margaret preserved. The dreams Bo has carried, the possibility of proving that small-scale agriculture can thrive in an economy designed to eliminate it. "I need to think about this," she says, though part of her already knows the answer. "Don't think too long," Bo replies, returning to his work with movements that suggest acceptance of whatever she decides. Some opportunities don't wait for perfect timing. As Sophie drives home through the gathering dusk, the job offer her pocket feels like both salvation and temptation, the kind of choice that reveals what you value most when everything else falls away. Sophie spends Thursday morning in Margaret's barn, staring up at the massive, hand-hewn beam that spans the building's width like the backbone of some ancient creature. The beam is original construction from the 1890s, cut from a tree that probably grew for centuries before Billy Connolly's father shaped it with hand tools and muscle power. Now it supports the entire structure, bearing weight that would crush lesser timber. She's been avoiding this restoration project for weeks, intimidated by the scope of work required to make the barn suitable for the wedding venue and event space. They've been planning, but with the Chicago job offer deadline looming, she finds herself drawn to the most challenging task, as if proving she can restore this beam will somehow prove she belongs here permanently. The wood is sound despite its age, darkened by decades of weather and wear, but still solid at its core. Someone, probably Billy himself, reinforced it with steel brackets in the 1950s, recognizing its importance to the building's structural integrity. Now those brackets need attention, rust removed, and protective coating applied to ensure another 50 years of service. Ambitious project for a Thursday morning, Bo observes, finding her perched on a ladder with steel wool and rust remover, attacking decades of oxidation with the systematic determination she brings to everything else. Seemed like a good day. To tackle something that's been intimidating me, Sophie replies, not pausing in her work. The cub's cap sits backward on her head now, keeping hair out of her eyes while she focuses on the tedious but necessary task of metal restoration. Any particular reason you're feeling intimidated today? She climbs down the ladder and shows him the beam's progress, half cleaned, half still showing the rust and neglect of years. This beam is what holds everything together. If it fails, the whole barn comes down. But if you maintain it properly, it lasts for generations. Bo understands the metaphor she's constructing, the parallel between structural engineering and life choices. Heavy responsibility for one piece of wood, heavy responsibility for any foundation. Sophie's hands show the evidence of her morning's work, scraped knuckles, steel wool embedded under her fingernails, the kind of damage that comes from tackling jobs that can't be delegated or postponed. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about commitment versus willingness to try. They work together in comfortable silence, Bo helping her move the ladder while she continues the painstaking process of rust removal and wood preservation. The barn feels different when they're both working in it, less like an overwhelming restoration project and more like a space with potential, a building that could host weddings and workshops and community events if they can figure out how to finance the vision. I called Chicago this morning, Sophie says as they break for lunch, settling on hay bales with sandwiches and coffee from her perpetually problematic kitchen. Told them I need until Monday to make a final decision. What did they say? They extended the deadline. Apparently I'm more valuable than I realized, which is both flattering and terrifying. She studies the restored section of beam, admiring the way proper cleaning reveals the wood's natural beauty. But value in Chicago doesn't necessarily translate to value here. Different kinds of value, Bo agrees. Question is which kind? Matters more to you. Sophie pulls a folded paper from her pocket, not the job offer, but a different document entirely. I got something else yesterday. Preliminary approval for a USDA rural development grant. $50,000 for sustainable agriculture and agritourism development, contingent on matching funds and a detailed business plan. Bo examines the letter with growing excitement. This is significant funding. Could cover most of your infrastructure improvements plus some of my livestock restocking. Could also disappear if I'm not here to follow through on the application process. Grant funding requires constant attention, quarterly reports, compliance monitoring. Not something you can manage from Chicago, even with the best intentions. The Practical implications settle between them like a test of priorities. The grant represents exactly the kind of opportunity they've been hoping for, but it requires the kind of sustained local presence that accepting the Chicago job would make impossible. There's something else, Sophie continues, her voice carrying a different kind of excitement. I contacted 3 other small farms in the valley, the ones that are still operating but struggling with marketing and distribution. They're interested in creating a cooperative arrangement, shared booth space at farmers' markets, joint purchasing of supplies, maybe even shared agritourism programming. Like Maggie's old Valley Cooperative? Exactly like that, but updated. For current conditions, instead of just equipment sharing, we'd be sharing marketing, customer relationships, even some processing facilities. Sophie's enthusiasm builds as she describes the possibilities. 5 small farms working together could compete with larger operations, especially if we focus on quality and local connection rather than volume. The scope of her vision impresses him, but it also emphasizes how much their success depends on her staying to implement and manage these complex partnerships. Leadership requires presence, and presence requires choosing this place over other opportunities. As afternoon light slants through the barn's windows, illuminating dust motes and possibilities in equal measure, Sophie returns to work on the beam with renewed energy. Each stroke of steel wool reveals more of the wood's natural character. Each hour of patient labor brings the barn closer to its potential as community gathering space. This beam has been holding up this barn for over a century, she says, running, her hand along the clean section with obvious satisfaction. It's seen droughts and floods, boom times and depression, families coming and going, but it endures because someone cares enough to maintain it. Bo watches her work with growing recognition of what she's really saying. Some foundations are worth the investment required to preserve them. Some partnerships justify the risk of choosing the uncertain over the secure. Some places become home not because they're easy, but because they're worth the effort required to belong there. The restored beam gleams in the afternoon light, ready to support whatever structure they decide to build around it. Sophie discovers the oil survey maps by accident, filed incorrectly in a folder marked Property Tax Records that she's reviewing for their grant application. The documents are recent, dated just 8 months ago, and carry the official letterhead of Geological Survey Services, a company she's never heard of, but which appears to have conducted extensive subsurface analysis of properties throughout Copper Ridge Valley. The maps show her grandfather's farm, Bo's ranch, and a dozen other properties marked with geological symbols she doesn't understand, but which clearly indicate something valuable beneath the surface. Coordinates, depth measurements, and estimated reserves are noted in precise technical language that speaks of professional assessment rather than casual speculation. What catches her attention isn't the geological data, it's the client name, listed on every document. Henderson Development Corporation. She finds Bo in his kitchen, reviewing their joint grant application with the methodical attention that farming has taught him to bring to paperwork. The morning light reveals the careful handwriting that documents their vision for sustainable agriculture, community cooperation, and economic diversification, plans that suddenly seem naive in light of what she's discovered. We need to talk, Sophie says, spreading the survey maps across his kitchen table like evidence of betrayal. Look what I found in Margaret's property records. Bo examines the documents with growing comprehension, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something approaching anger. The maps reveal the scope of Henderson Development's interest in the valley, not just surface land for suburban development, but subsurface mineral rights that could be worth millions. Oil, he says quietly, tracing the survey lines that crisscross both their properties. They've been conducting geological surveys while making offers for agricultural land. According to these reports, your property sits on top of a significant shale formation, the kind that's been making landowners rich in North Dakota and Texas. Sophie's voice carries the outrage of someone who's discovered they've been lied to for months. They weren't trying to buy ranch land for development. They were trying to buy mineral rights for extraction. The implications transform everything. They thought they understood about Henderson Development's persistence, the repeated offers, the patient approach through intermediaries like Tom Hendricks, the willingness to pay above market prices for seemingly marginal agricultural land. All of it makes sense when viewed through the lens of mineral extraction rather than suburban development. Tom, Bo says, the name carrying the weight of betrayal. His neighbor, his father's friend, the man who'd been counseling him to accept Henderson's offers while claiming concern for Bo's financial welfare. He had to know. Properties this, close together, geological formations don't stop at fence lines. Sophie studies the survey data with her analytical background, recognizing patterns that suggest systematic investigation rather than random exploration. This survey was conducted 6 months before Tom sold his property to Henderson. He knew exactly what he was selling and what they were buying. The betrayal cuts deeper than financial deception. Tom Hendricks has been a Valley resident for 70 years, Bo's neighbor for 42. Someone whose advice carried the weight of friendship and shared experience. To discover that he's been acting as Henderson Development's advocate while knowing the true value of what Bo was being pressured to sell feels like a violation of everything small communities are supposed to represent. We need to find out if the mineral rights are included in our deeds, Sophie says, already thinking like someone who's spent months navigating legal documents. In Montana, mineral rights can be separated from surface rights if previous owners sold the subsurface rights. We might not own what's under our land anyway. Bo pulls out the deed to his property, a document he's reviewed countless times while fighting foreclosure but never examined for mineral rights provisions. The legal language is dense and archaic, filled with 19th century terminology that requires careful interpretation. Here, he says, pointing to a clause buried in the property description, mineral rights reserved to surface owner unless specifically transferred in separate transaction. His voice carries growing excitement. Looks like my family retained everything when they proved up the homestead claim. Sophie examines Margaret's deed with similar intensity, finding comparable language that suggests her grandmother owned not just the surface farm, but everything beneath it. The discovery transforms their financial situation from desperate to potentially revolutionary. If they can prevent Henderson Development from somehow acquiring what they failed to purchase through deception. We need legal advice, Sophie says, already calculating the implications. If these surveys are accurate, we're sitting on assets worth more than both our properties combined. But we're also dealing with a company that's been operating with information we didn't have, making offers based on knowledge they kept hidden. Corporate money versus family farmers, Bo observes grimly. David and Goliath, except Goliath has lawyers and geological surveys and the kind of resources that can outlast individual resistance. The oil survey maps spread across the table like a revelation of hidden value and hidden danger. The same land that's been breaking their backs with debt and drought might actually be their salvation if they can navigate the legal and financial complexities that corporations like Henderson Development manipulate as a matter of routine business. Monday morning, first thing, Sophie says, folding the maps with careful precision. We find a lawyer who specializes in mineral rights and corporate malfeasance. If Henderson Development thought they could manipulate us with partial information, they're about to learn what happens when city marketing skills meet rural stubbornness. For the first time in months, Bo feels hope that's grounded in something more substantial than weather and wishful thinking. The land his family has worked for 4 generations might finally provide the security they've been fighting to preserve, if they can prove that deception invalidates the very foundation of Henderson Development's offers. The Chicago job offer deadline suddenly seems like a minor concern compared to the possibility of exposing corporate fraud and securing the valley's future for the next generation of farmers, who understand that some treasures are worth more than money, and some fights are worth whatever they cost. Friday morning arrives with the crisp clarity that Montana winters bring, the kind of cold that sharpens focus and demands decisive action. Sophie stands in the Copper Ridge County Courthouse, holding the new deed that formally establishes the Larkin Delacroix Agricultural Cooperative, while lawyers from Henderson Development shuffle papers and whisper urgently among themselves at the opposing table. The legal document represents more than business partnership. It's a declaration of commitment to place, to each other and to the community they've rallied around their cause. Rebecca Martinez worked through the night to finalize the cooperative structure, ensuring that their mineral rights are legally protected under a partnership agreement that prevents either individual from selling without the other's consent. Your Honor, Martinez begins, addressing Judge Patricia Crenshaw with the measured confidence of someone presenting an ironclad case. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of corporate deception designed to manipulate landowners into selling valuable mineral rights for a fraction of their worth. Henderson Development's lead attorney, a sharp-dressed man from Billings who clearly considers this rural courthouse beneath his usual venues, objects with practiced arrogance. The plaintiff presents no evidence that my client concealed material, information. Geological surveys are standard due diligence for any significant land acquisition. Standard due diligence shared with landowners, Martinez counters, producing copies of the oil survey maps that Henderson Development never intended Sophie and Bo to see, not concealed information used to manipulate uninformed sellers into accepting below-market offers. Judge Crenshaw examines the survey documents with the careful attention of someone who's spent 30 years adjudicating disputes between powerful interests and individual citizens. Her family homesteaded in this valley during the 1920s, giving her personal understanding of what's at stake beyond legal technicalities. The courtroom fills with valley residents who've driven through morning cold to witness this confrontation between corporate power and community resistance. Martha Hendricks sits in the front row, her presence a pointed rebuke to her husband's betrayal. The Yazzie family occupies an entire bench, along with other farmers, market vendors and neighbors, who've signed the petition supporting sustainable agriculture over industrial development. Furthermore, Martinez continues, the defendant's use of local intermediaries to apply pressure while concealing material information constitutes fraudulent inducement. Mr. Thomas Hendricks has admitted to receiving compensation from Henderson Development for encouraging his neighbors to accept offers while knowing those offers were based on incomplete disclosure. Tom Hendricks enters the courtroom as Martinez speaks, his weathered face carrying the weight of community judgment. He takes a seat in the back, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who've trusted his counsel for decades. The man who advised Bo to know when he's beat is now revealed as someone who was beating the drum for corporate interests while claiming friendship and concern. Henderson Development's attorney attempts damage control. My client's offers were made in good faith based on agricultural property values. Any mineral exploration was conducted as standard environmental assessment, not concealment of value. Standard environmental assessment conducted 8 months. Before making any offers, Martinez's voice carries the edge of someone exposing obvious lies. Assessment that revealed significant oil reserves, which your client never disclosed to property owners. Sophie watches the legal proceedings with the satisfaction of someone who's learned to fight with weapons she never knew she possessed. 6 months ago, she was a burned-out marketing executive with no knowledge of farming, mineral rights, or community organizing. Now she's part of a partnership that successfully challenged corporate deception and rallied community resistance. Judge Crenshaw calls for recess, allowing both sides to review evidence and prepare final arguments. During the break, Sophie and Bo step outside into winter sunshine that reveals the valley in all its stark beauty. Mountains snow-covered and magnificent, pastures dormant but promising spring renewal, the kind of landscape that justifies fighting for regardless of what lies beneath the surface. Nervous? Bo asks, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Excited, Sophie replies, surprising herself with the honesty. 6 months ago, I thought success meant climbing corporate ladders and accumulating salary increases. Now it means exposing fraud and protecting communities. Tom Hendricks approaches them hesitantly, hat in hand, expression carrying 40 years of neighborhood history complicated by recent betrayal. Bo, I need to say something. Say it in court, Bo responds without warmth, under oath where it might actually mean something. Henderson Development offered me a finder's fee for every property I helped them acquire. $50,000. For your place, $25,000 for each of the smaller operations. Tom's voice carries genuine regret, but regret doesn't undo months of manipulation. I told myself I was helping neighbors avoid foreclosure, but the truth is, I was helping myself to money I didn't earn. The admission provides final confirmation of Henderson Development's systematic deception, but it also reveals the personal cost of corporate manipulation. Tom Hendricks sacrificed 40 years of community standing for money that probably seemed like salvation at the time. When court reconvenes, Judge Crenshaw delivers her ruling with the authority of someone who understands that legal decisions shape communities for generations. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Henderson Development Corporation conducted extensive geological surveys while making property offers without disclosing material information about mineral value. This court finds their actions constitute fraudulent inducement and orders immediate cessation of all acquisition efforts, pending full disclosure and restitution discussions. The courtroom erupts in applause from Valley residents who've watched their community fight back against corporate power and win. Sophie feels Bo's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining like everything else they've built together. Partnership strengthened by shared struggle, love deepened by common purpose, hope grounded in the kind of victory that proves ordinary. People can defeat extraordinary odds when they work together. The new deed in Sophie's pocket represents more than legal protection for their mineral rights. It represents the formal beginning of something that started with a city woman in expensive shoes, asking for neighborly advice, and grew into a partnership that saved not just 2 failing operations, but an entire community's right to determine its own future. 1 year later, Sophie stands in the same barn where she first discovered Margaret's archives, but the space has been transformed into something Margaret herself could never have imagined. White lights strung between the restored beams cast warm shadows across tables laden with food grown on their cooperative farms, while neighbors from throughout the valley celebrate her wedding to Bo with the kind of genuine joy that small communities reserve for stories that end well. The wedding quilt spread across the gift table represents months of work by valley women who've embraced Sophie as family, each square crafted from fabric that tells a story. Martha Hendricks contributed a piece from her grandmother's wedding dress. The Yazzie family added traditional Navajo patterns that speak of connection to land and seasons. Even Rebecca Martinez, their lawyer who's become a friend, contributed a square made from her father's work shirts, representing the dignity of honest labor. Maggie would have loved this, Bo says, joining Sophie beside the quilt as their guests fill plates with vegetables they've grown, and bread Martha baked in the wood-fired oven she convinced her husband to build as penance for his Henderson Development betrayal. She always said this barn was meant for celebrations. Sophie touches her slightly rounded belly, where new life grows, with the same patient determination that's transformed their struggling operations into a thriving cooperative venture. The pregnancy announcement came 3 months ago. Perfect timing to coincide with news that their joint operation has exceeded all first-year projections for revenue, community impact, and environmental stewardship. The Larkin Delacroix Agricultural Cooperative now includes 5 family farms working together on everything from shared equipment purchases to coordinated marketing strategies. Their farmers market booth has expanded to 3 locations. Their CSA program has a waiting list, and their agritourism operation hosts weekend visitors who want to experience authentic agricultural life without the fantasy versions promoted by corporate marketing. "I have an announcement," Sophie says, tapping her glass to gather attention from guests who've filled the barn with laughter and conversation. The restored beam overhead bears the weight of celebration as easily as it once supported hay storage, proving that good foundations can adapt to new purposes without losing their essential strength. Most of you know that Bo and I started this partnership because we were both struggling to keep our operations alive individually, she continues, her voice carrying across the space where she first learned to think like a farmer. What you might not know is that we've just received confirmation of a significant development that will benefit the entire valley. The room quiets with anticipation. Valley residents have learned to expect good news from the couple who turned corporate fraud into community victory. But Sophie's tone suggests something particularly significant. The Montana Department of Agriculture has approved our application to establish the Copper Ridge Valley as the state's first sustainable agriculture demonstration district, Bo announces, taking Sophie's hand as he speaks, which means federal funding for infrastructure improvements, educational programs, and marketing support for every farm operation in the valley. The applause that follows reflects more than celebration of funding. It represents recognition that their individual fight for survival has grown into community-wide renewal. The designation will bring resources that individual operations could never access, creating the kind of cooperative advantage that allows small farms to compete with industrial agriculture. Tom Hendricks approaches them as the celebration continues, his expression carrying the humility of someone who's spent a year rebuilding trust he'd damaged through betrayal. "Wanted to thank you both for not holding grudges. Could have made things a lot harder for me after what I did." "Holding grudges is expensive," Sophie replies, though her tone carries warmth rather than coldness. "Takes energy we need for building instead of fighting." Tom nods toward his grandson, who's been helping with harvest work as part of a youth agricultural program the cooperative established. "Boy's learned more about farming this summer than I taught him in 10 years. Keeps talking about maybe staying in the valley instead of heading to Denver after graduation. It's exactly the kind of generational continuity that sustainable agriculture requires, young people who see farming as opportunity rather than dead end. Communities that support agricultural careers instead of encouraging exodus to urban employment." Sophie and Bo's partnership has created ripple effects that extend far beyond their own operations. As evening settles over the valley, guests gradually depart with leftover food and promises to help with next week's harvest. Sophie and Bo clean up with the comfortable efficiency of people who've learned to work together on everything from wedding planning to crop rotation schedules. "Any regrets about Chicago?" Bo asks as they extinguish the lights that transformed the barn into wedding venue, returning it to agricultural functionality until the next celebration requires its services. "Only that it took me so long to find my way here," Sophie replies, her hand resting on the belly where their child grows with each passing day. "Turns out home isn't where you start. It's where you choose to build something lasting." The wedding. Quilt lies folded in Margaret's old trunk, where it will wait for the next generation to discover the stories woven into its fabric. Stories of corporate fraud defeated by community cooperation, of individual struggle transformed into shared strength, of love that bloomed in barren soil and grew into something strong enough to support not just 2 people, but an entire valley's. Future outside, stars begin to appear over mountains that have watched this land support countless generations of dreamers, fighters, and builders. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, weather, markets, the eternal struggle of coaxing abundance from difficult ground. But tonight, Sophie and Beau stand together in the barn where their partnership began, surrounded by evidence that love really can save not just farms and souls, but entire communities willing to fight for what they believe in. The restored beam overhead bears witness to another beginning, another generation ready to carry forward the promise that good land rewards good work, especially when that work is shared by people committed to each other and to the place they've chosen to call home.